Welcome back to the deep dive. I have to say, I am incredibly excited about the stack of research we have on the desk today. It's thick, it's complex, but it is also, well, it's surprisingly human.
It really is. It's a fascinating mix of biography, history, and, some very high-level political theory.
Usually when we dive into the world of great philosophers, capital G, capital P, the mental image is pretty standard. You picture someone locked away in a tower, maybe in, 18th century Germany, scribbling furiously by candlelight. They are detached, they're stoic, and they produce these massive, dense tomes that take a lifetime to decipher.
The solitary genius model.
Right.
Kant sitting in Königsberg, never leaving his hometown. That is the traditional image.
Right. But today's subject,
Yeah.
he completely destroys that image. We are tackling a figure who is a massive paradox. He was arguably the 20th century's greatest philosopher, certainly one of the most decorated, yet here's the kicker.
He hated writing.
He absolutely despised it. I mean, he found the physical act of putting pen to paper to be, well, a kind of torture. There is this quote from a colleague of his, Maurice Burra, that I found in the notes, and it actually made me laugh out loud. Burra compared our subject to our Lord and Socrates.
Wow. That is a very high bar.
It is, right? You'd think he's saying he was some kind of messiah, but the reasoning was hilarious. Barr said it was because, like Jesus and Socrates, he does not publish much, but thinks and says a great deal and has had an enormous influence on our times. We are, of course, talking about Sir Isaiah Berlin.
That is an incredibly fitting description. Berlin was a man who didn't just study ideas in a vacuum. He lived them. He was a witness to some of the most seismic shifts of the 20th century, and he processed all of it through conversation. He was the century's greatest talker.
And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to unpack the life of this talker. But this isn't just a biography. We have a specific mission here. We really need to understand how a man who saw the Russian Revolution with his own eyes as a 7-year-old boy ended up becoming a British knight and, maybe the most important voice on the concept of freedom.
And that journey from a terrified child in Petrograd to the halls of Oxford, that's the key to unlocking his ideas. We're going to explore his famous concepts. The hedgehog and the fox, which is probably the most famous intellectual parlor game in history.
I love that one. It's like a horoscope for smart people.
It is, and we will get into why he actually thought that was kind of funny. But we'll also get into the heavy stuff, the two concepts of liberty. And honestly, this is the part where the big aha moment usually hits for people.
Yeah.
Because Berlin warns us about a specific type of freedom, positive liberty. That sounds amazing on paper. It sounds like exactly what we should want. But he argues it can actually be a trapdoor to tyranny.
That is the part I'm really itching to get to, the idea that freedom can be used as a weapon against itself. But before we get to the philosophy, we have to understand the man. And despite the knighthood, despite the Order of Merit, despite being the ultimate insider of the British establishment, he insisted on a very specific, very different identity.
He was incredibly firm on this. He said, and this is a direct quote, "I am a Russian Jew from Riga, and all my years in England cannot change this."
So if we want to get him, we can't start in a library in Oxford. We have to start in Riga.
Let's go back to the early 20th century. Riga is now the capital of Latvia, but back in 1909, when Isaiah Berlin was born, it was a major industrial hub of the Russian Empire. It was a bustling, diverse city.
Right, and the Berlin family wasn't just, scraping by. I'm looking at the notes on his father, Mendel Berlin. Comfortable seems like a massive understatement.
It is. Mendel was a timber merchant, and not just a local seller. He was the head of the Riga Association of Timber Merchants. This was a big deal.
I have this image in my head of what that means. The source material describes these massive rafts of timber being floated down the Daugava River to the sawmills. It feels very, physical, very elemental.
It was. This was real wealth, generated from the land and trade. They owned forests in Russia, and because they were dealing with Western companies to sell this timber, the Berlin household was incredibly cosmopolitan. It wasn't an isolated bubble.
The language situation alone is just dizzying to me. I mean, I struggle to order coffee in a second language, but listen to this environment. His father spoke Yiddish, Russian, German, French, and English.
Wow.
His mother, Marie, was fluent in Yiddish, Russian, and Latvian. So little Isaiah is basically swimming in this soup of languages from the day he's born.
And that's crucial. Think about what that does to a developing brain. When you grow up with 5 different words for freedom or truth, and each of those words carries a slightly different cultural flavor, you learn something very early on.
What's that?
You learn that there isn't just one way to describe reality.
You're naturally primed to see multiple perspectives.
Exactly. It's the incubator for a historian of ideas. But that idyllic, wealthy life in Riga, the timber, the French lessons, the comfort, it didn't last.
No. The family moves to Petrograd, what we now call St. Petersburg, when he's about 6 years old. And at first it seems like they are just moving up in the world. They move into this massive building on Anglesky Prospect. And listen to who their neighbors are. They've got the daughter of the famous composer Rimsky-Korsakov. They've got a Princess Emeritinsky.
This was the absolute epicenter of the Russian intelligentsia and the aristocracy. They were living among the elite of the elite.
And then 1917 hits, the Russian Revolution, and Berlin is a child, watching this entire world just collapse in real time.
It's hard for us to imagine the scale of that disruption. The source mentions this incredible detail about the reversal of fortune. Berlin watched the princess and the composer's daughter, people who were essentially royalty in that social circle, suddenly being forced to go out and sweep the yards and stoke the stoves of the building.
The social pyramid just flipped upside down overnight.
It did. And for a child, that is a profound lesson in how fragile civilization is. You know, one day you have servants, the next day you are the servant. But that was just the social change. There was also the violence.
This is the moment I really want to focus on. There is one specific memory, one traumatic event that the sources say defined his entire political philosophy. It involves a pharaon.
Yes, a pharaon, which, in the slang of the time, this was a term for a czarist policeman.
Yeah.
A government enforcer.
So set the scene for us. It's the middle of the revolution. The streets are chaotic. Berlin is about 7 years old.
He's out walking, or possibly looking from a balcony or a window, and he spots this pharaon on a rooftop. The man is a sniper, loyal to the Tsar, and he's shooting at the revolutionaries down in the street.
And the crowd spots him.
They do. And this is the image that burned itself into Berlin's brain. He watched the crowd storm the building. He watched them drag this man from the rooftop. He called it a lynching bee.
A lynching bee. That is such a chilling phrase.
It is. It implies a buzz, a swarm, a collective loss of control, a mob mentality. And he didn't just see the man die. He saw the struggle. He describes seeing the man physically fighting for his life, twisting and turning in the grip of a mob of about 20 people before they finally dragged him away to his death.
He said later, and this is a direct quote from our notes, "That gave me a permanent horror of violence which has remained with me for the rest of my life."
That moment is the key. If you want to understand why Isaiah Berlin spent his life suspicious of grand revolutions, suspicious of utopian promises, suspicious of anyone who says the end justifies the means, you have to go back to that 7-year-old boy.
Because he saw the reality of it. It wasn't a theory in a book. It wasn't an abstract concept.
Exactly. When later philosophers would talk about, the necessary violence of the proletariat or cleansing society, Berlin didn't see an abstract concept. He saw that terrified man on the rooftop. He realized that the egg you break to make the omelet is a human being.
That distinction between the abstract idea and the human reality seems to be the core of everything he did.
It absolutely is. It instilled in him a lifelong belief that physical coercion, violence, is the ultimate evil. You cannot build a perfect society if the foundation is that kind of brutality.
So, understandably, the Berlins realize they have to get out. They are identified as bourgeoisie, which is a dangerous label under the Bolsheviks.
A death sentence, potentially.
They manage to flee back to Riga in 1920, but even there, they run into issues with the new Latvian government. So 1921, they make the big move to England.
Berlin is 11 years old. And here's another shock to the system. He arrives in a London suburb, Surbiton, with virtually no English.
Can you imagine? 11 years old, you've seen a revolution, you've seen a lynching, you've been exiled twice, and now you're dropped into a British prep school where everyone is talking about cricket and tea.
It must have been incredibly isolating. And yet, and this speaks to that talker ability we mentioned, he didn't withdraw. He attacked the language.
The notes say he reached proficiency within a year.
Within a year. By age 12, he was fluent. He didn't just learn the vocabulary, he absorbed the cadence, the culture, the humor. He became, in a way, more English than the English.
He goes to St. Paul's School, then on to Oxford, Corpus Christi College. And looking at his academic record, it's just It's intimidating. He didn't just pass, he dominated.
It really is a meteoric rise. He gets a first-class honors degree, he wins the John Locke Prize for Philosophy, and just to give you some context on how smart this guy was, he outscored A.J. Ayer for that prize.
And A.J. Ayer is not a lightweight.
No, Ayer was a titan of 20th century philosophy. He was the golden boy of logical positivism, and Berlin beat him.
And then he achieves what is sort of the holy grail of British academia. He gets elected to a prize fellowship at All Souls College, Oxford.
We need to pause on All Souls because it is unique. Oxford has many colleges, but All Souls is, well, it's the summit. There are no undergraduates. You don't teach 19-year-olds. It is purely a research institution for the absolute elite of the academic world, the best of the best.
And the significance here is that he was the first Jewish scholar to get in.
The first unconverted Jew. And that is a massive distinction. At that time, if you wanted to advance in the British establishment, the pressure to convert to Christianity, or at least to, downplay your Jewishness, was immense. Berlin didn't do that.
He kept the identity. Russian Jew from Riga.
Exactly. He walked into the most exclusive club in England on his own terms. And that reinforces that idea of him being an outsider on the inside. He was part of the establishment, he wore the robes, he drank the wine, but he always had that slight detachment. He could see the British tradition clearly because he wasn't entirely of it.
So he's at All Souls. He's brilliant. He's the talk of the town. But let's go back to this talking philosopher thing, because as he climbs this academic ladder, his method of working is, well, it's eccentric, to say the least.
It is delightful. We established he hated writing. So how do you produce books and essays and lectures if you refuse to sit down and type?
You talk.
You talk. He used a Grundig tape recorder.
But not in a quiet, sterile room.
Right.
That's not how he worked.
No, that would be too boring for him. He would often dictate his essays and letters while he was hanging out with friends. He needed an audience. He needed the energy of a conversation to get his brain working.
I'm just imagining being his friend. You go over for a drink, and he's pacing around the room, shouting into a microphone about the French Revolution, and then turning to you to ask if you want a biscuit.
That is probably exactly how it happened. And spare a thought for the secretaries.
Oh, the poor typists. They must have had the hardest job in Oxford.
They had to transcribe these tapes. And remember, Berlin spoke in a rapid-fire staccato. A schoolmate described his speech as a breathless marathon. He would string ideas together, jump to a new topic, crack a joke, quote a Greek poet, and then circle back, sometimes without finishing the first sentence.
The source mentions that sometimes the secretaries would accidentally include his jokes and his laughter in the final typed text.
Which is amazing. You'd be reading a dense paragraph about political liberty and suddenly there's a huh or a pass the sugar in the middle of it. But this method resulted in a writing style that is unique in philosophy.
How so?
If you read Berlin, it doesn't feel like a dry textbook. It feels animated, it has a pulse, it mimics the flow of a brilliant, rapid-fire conversation.
It feels like his brain was just moving faster than a pen could ever keep up with.
That is very likely true. And this conversational style made his complex ideas accessible. He wasn't trying to bury you in jargon, he was trying to talk to you, to persuade you.
So World War II rolls around. Berlin wants to help, he wants to fight, but he can't.
Right. He was disqualified from military service. 2 reasons. He was born in Latvia, which complicated his status, and he had a birth injury, a damaged left arm.
So he can't go to the trenches. Instead, he goes to the embassies. He works for British Information Services in New York, then in Washington, D.C., and eventually he gets sent to Moscow.
And this is a pivotal moment. He returns to the land of his childhood. But it's not the Russia of the Tsars anymore, it's Stalin's Russia.
And in 1945, in Leningrad, formerly Petrograd, his home, he has a meeting that sounds like something out of a spy novel or a romantic tragedy. He meets the poet, Anna Akhmatova.
This is a legendary encounter in literary history. Akhmatova was one of the greatest poets of the 20th century, but she was living under the heavy shadow of the Soviet regime. She was monitored, censored, her family members had been arrested. She was essentially a prisoner in her own country.
A kind of internal exile.
Precisely. And in walks Isaiah Berlin, the Oxford Don, the man from the West, a ghost from a world she could barely remember.
They spend a night talking, just talking, from the evening until the sun came up the next morning.
Can you imagine that conversation? The things they must have talked about?
The source says this meeting had serious repercussions for her.
It did. Stalin was pathologically paranoid. The fact that she met with a British diplomat made her a target again. She was denounced publicly. It caused her a lot of trouble. But emotionally and intellectually, it was profound. For Akhmatova, Berlin represented a connection to the Western world, to freedom, to the life of the mind that the Soviets were trying to crush.
And for Berlin, what did he take away from it?
It was a reality check,
Yeah.
a powerful, visceral one. He had the childhood memory of the violence of the revolution. Now he was seeing the long-term result. He was seeing the gray, crushing weight of totalitarianism on a brilliant artist. It reinforced everything he felt about the dangers of a state that controls everything.
It's interesting how his life keeps circling back to this theme. The childhood trauma, the exile, the return to Russia. It all builds toward his philosophy. He wasn't sitting in an ivory tower inventing problems. He was trying to solve the problems that he saw destroying lives.
Exactly. His philosophy was a response to the world he witnessed.
Okay, let's dive into those ideas. Let's start with the lighter one, the one everyone loves to quote. The Hedgehog and the Fox.
Ah, yes. The Hedgehog and the Fox. It's actually the title of an essay he wrote about Tolstoy. But the title itself comes from a fragment of an ancient Greek poet, Archilochus.
And the line is, "The fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing."
It's such a simple, evocative image, isn't it? But Berlin used it to categorize human thinkers. And really, all of us.
So let's break it down for the listener. If I'm a hedgehog, what does my brain look like?
If you're a hedgehog, you view the world through a single defining lens. You have one central vision, one system, one organizing principle. Everything you see, everything you experience, you relate back to this one big idea.
Okay, like a unified theory of everything.
Exactly. Berlin gives Plato as the prime example. For Plato, everything boiled down to the world of forms. It's one big, coherent system. If you have a question, the system has the answer. Or think of a religious fundamentalist. Everything is about God's will. Or a strict Marxist. Everything is about class struggle.
It's a very tidy way to see the world. It's comforting, I imagine.
It is. It provides certainty. You never have to wonder why something happened. You always have the answer key.
Okay, so that's the hedgehog. What about the fox?
The fox knows many things. The fox draws on a wide variety of experiences. They see the world as complex, contradictory, maybe even a bit messy. They don't try to boil everything down to one slogan or one theory. They are comfortable with the idea that not everything fits together neatly.
And the example there?
Aristotle.
Huh.
Or Shakespeare. Think about Shakespeare. Does he have a system?
Mm-hmm.
A one big idea? No. He writes comedies, tragedies, histories. He shows us kings and fools and lovers and murderers. He engages with the richness of life in all its variety without forcing it into a single box.
I feel like everyone listening right now is instantly trying to categorize himself. Am I a hedgehog? Am I a fox? I'm definitely a fox.
That is the appeal. It's irresistible. We can't help it.
But here is the funny part. Berlin never meant it to be taken so seriously.
No, he didn't. He said later, and I love this, "I never meant it very seriously. I meant it as a kind of enjoyable intellectual game." He wrote it as a bit of fun.
But the public loved it. It became his most popular essay.
It did. But despite him calling it a game, it does matter. Because deep down, Berlin was definitely a fox. And he was deeply suspicious of hedgehogs.
What's suspicious? What's wrong with having a big idea?
Because hedgehogs, people who think there is one big answer, tend to be the ones who become fanatics. Think about it. If you truly believe you have the one true solution to all human problems, if you have the cure for all suffering, what are you willing to do to implement it?
Anything.
Exactly. If you have the secret to utopia and someone stands in your way, that person isn't just someone with a different opinion. They are an obstacle to the salvation of humanity, and obstacles get removed.
So the hedgehog mentality, if you take it too far, leads back to the pharaoh on the roof. It leads to the lynching bee.
That is the connection. That's the danger. A fox who sees the world as messy and complicated is less likely to force everyone into a single mold. A fox knows that there is no magic bullet.
This transitions perfectly into his most heavy-hitting political idea, the two concepts of liberty.
This is the landmark lecture he gave in 1958. His inaugural lecture as a big-shot professor at Oxford. And this is where we really have to pay attention, because the distinction he makes is subtle, but the consequences are, well, they're life and death.
Okay, let's unpack it. Two concepts. Negative liberty and positive liberty. Let's start with negative liberty. Negative usually sounds bad, like nobody wants a negative bank account.
Right, but in this context, negative just means absence of. Negative liberty is the answer to the question, what is the area within which I am left alone?
So freedom from.
Yes.
Yes.
Freedom from interference. Freedom from coercion. If I want to walk down the street and no one stops me, I have negative liberty. If I want to buy a specific book and the government doesn't ban it, I have negative liberty.
It's basically, leave me alone.
Roughly, yes. It's the classic English liberal tradition. Hobbes, lock, mill. It's about carving out a private sphere where the state or your neighbors cannot enter. It's a no trespassing sign around the individual.
Okay, that sounds like what most of us think of when we say freedom. So what is positive liberty?
Positive liberty answers a different question. Who is in control? It's not just about being left alone. It's about being your own master.
Freedom to.
Freedom to. Freedom to participate in government. Freedom to control your own destiny. Freedom to be a fully realized, rational human being.
That sounds good too, right? I mean, I want to be the master of my own life. I don't want to just be a leaf blowing in the wind.
It does sound good. It sounds noble. And Berlin acknowledges that it is a valid form of liberty. He's not saying positive liberty is inherently evil, but, and here's the aha moment we promised, he argues that positive liberty has a trapdoor, a very dangerous slippery slope.
Okay, take us down the slope. How does being your own master turn into something bad?
It starts with a psychological split. You look at yourself and say, well, I have a higher self, the rational thinking, moral part of me, and I have a lower self, the part that is lazy or addicted to bad habits or irrational.
Okay, I relate to that. My lower self wants to eat donuts and sleep. My higher self wants to go to the gym and work. I know that feeling.
Exactly. Now, a proponent of positive liberty might say, true freedom is when your higher self is in charge. If you stay in bed and eat donuts, you are slave to your appetites. You aren't really free.
I can follow that logic. If I'm an addict, I'm not free. I'm a slave to the drug. So getting clean is freedom, even if it's hard.
Right. And on an individual level, that makes a lot of sense. But now expand that to politics. This is where it gets scary.
Yeah.
The state steps in. The state or the party or the great leader claims to represent your higher self.
Oh, I see where this is going.
They say, we know what you really want, even if you don't know it yourself. We know that your true, rational self wants to be a productive citizen or a good communist or a pious believer. Your lower self is just confused. So we are going to force you to do those things.
And by forcing me.
They claim they're actually making you free.
That is the twist.
That is the authoritarian twist. They're forcing you to be free. They are liberating your true self from your false self. They are saving you from yourself.
That is terrifying. It's like a linguistic trick that justifies tyranny.
It's exactly that. This is how you get re-education camps. This is how you get the terror of the French Revolution with Robespierre talking about the Republic of Virtue. This is how you get Soviet communism. They aren't saying we are oppressing you. They are saying we are helping you realize your true potential.
It's gaslighting on a national scale.
It is. And Berlin saw this historically. He saw how positive liberty was used to defend nationalism, social engineering, and collective control. It connects directly back to his horror of the Russian Revolution. The Bolsheviks believe they knew what was best for the masses better than the masses did themselves.
So negative liberty, just leaving people alone, might seem less ambitious. It doesn't promise to create a new man or a perfect society.
No, it doesn't. Negative liberty acknowledges that people might make bad choices. You might use your freedom to be lazy. You might use your freedom to be weird or to say things other people don't like. But Berlin argues that having that space, that frontier where the state cannot go, is the only true safeguard against tyranny.
It's the idea that it's better to be imperfect and free than perfected by a master.
Precisely.
This leads us to another major pillar of his thought. Because if we can't have this perfect, positive liberty society without it turning into a nightmare, what are we left with? We're left with a messy world.
We are left with value pluralism.
Which sounds like an academic buzzword, but I think is actually the most profound thing he ever wrote about.
It is the bedrock of his worldview. And it challenges something that Western philosophy had believed for thousands of years.
Which is?
The idea that all good things are compatible. From Plato to the Enlightenment, there was this assumption that truth, beauty, justice, liberty, equality, they all fit together like a perfect puzzle. If we are just smart enough, if we are rational enough, we can find the one solution where we get 100% of everything.
A utopia.
A utopia. And Berlin says no.
Just or no.
He says no. No, values are human creations. And the problem is they don't all fit together.
The core argument is that values can be valid, they can be good, yet they can be incompatible.
Exactly. Can you give us an example from the notes?
Sure. Let's take liberty and equality. Two things we all claim to want.
Right. Both are good things.
But think about it. If you want total liberty, absolute freedom for the strong, the talented, the wolves, you cannot have equality for the sheep. The strong will dominate the weak. The rich will get richer.
So to get more equality, you have to curtail the liberty of the strong. You have to tax them, regulate them, stop them from doing whatever they want.
So you can't have 100% of both at the same time.
You cannot. It is mathematically impossible. Or take another one. Justice and mercy. Both are virtues. We want a just legal system. We want a merciful society. But if a judge is perfectly just, they must apply the law exactly as written, no exceptions. If they are merciful, they soften the blow, they make an exception. You cannot be 100% just and 100% merciful in the same moment.
And when they clash, how do we measure which one is better? How do we choose?
Berlin says, you can't. That's the concept of incommensurability.
That's a big word.
It just means they lack a common measurement. You cannot measure these values against a common standard. There is no moral ruler that says liberty is worth 5 points and justice is worth 4 points. They are just different. They exist in different dimensions.
This brings us to what the outline calls the tragedy of choice.
Yes, and he uses the word tragedy intentionally because this conflict is not a mistake. It's not because we aren't smart enough to figure out the solution. Conflict is an intrinsic, irremovable element of human life.
That's a bit depressing, isn't it? To know that something is always lost? That we can never get it perfectly right?
It feels depressing at first. But Berlin would argue it's actually liberating.
How so?
Because it means we can stop chasing utopia. Berlin warns us that the search for a perfect society where all good things coexist is not just futile, it's dangerous. Because if you believe that a perfect society is possible, you will feel justified in doing anything to achieve it. You will break as many eggs as necessary.
So what? Here is. Stop looking for the perfect solution because it doesn't exist.
Exactly. Except that every choice entails a loss. If we choose more liberty, we might lose some equality. That is a tragedy, but it's an unavoidable one. The goal of politics shouldn't be perfection. It should be decency. It should be, in his words, maintaining a precarious equilibrium. It's about avoiding the worst outcomes: suffering, cruelty, violence.
It's a very grown-up way of looking at the world. No fairy tales, just difficult trade-offs.
And it allows for empathy. This is his concept of objective pluralism. He argues that because we are all human, we can understand the values of other cultures, even if we disagree with them.
Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. Imagine a culture that prioritizes honor above everything else, above safety, above wealth. Now, I might not agree with that. I might prefer safety, but I can understand what honor is. I can recognize it as a real, legitimate human value. They aren't wrong in the sense of a math error. They are just prioritizing a different, valid human value.
So the clash isn't between good and evil.
No. As he famously said, the clash is not between good and evil, it is between good and good. And that is the hardest thing for humans to navigate.
This connects to his interest in the counter-enlightenment, doesn't it? Because the Enlightenment was all about finding those universal answers.
It does. Berlin was fascinated by the critics of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment thinkers like Descartes or Voltaire often sought universal, timeless truths, valid for all people at all times. Berlin was drawn to the guys who said, wait a minute, maybe it's not that simple. Thinkers like Vico, Herder, and Hamann.
Hamann is an interesting figure for Berlin.
He was. Hamann argued that human cognition is language. You can't have clear and distinct ideas without symbols or language. This opposes the Cartesian view that we think in pure abstract logic and then just, put it into words.
Which goes back to Berlin's own life, living in that soup of Russian, Yiddish, German, English. He understood that language shapes how we think, how we see the world.
And he applied this skepticism to history, too. In his lecture, Historical Inevitability, he rejected the idea of determinism.
That's the idea that history is on a set track, right? Like communism is inevitable or progress is inevitable.
Yeah, the hedgehog view of history. He rejected the idea that we are just puppets of impersonal forces like economics or technology.
Yeah.
But he also rejected the great man theory, that history is just the biography of heroes and villains. He found that binary choice nonsensical. History is a messy mix of forces, luck, and individual choices.
So he's a fox again. It's not one big force and it's not one great man. It's a complicated, messy mix of everything.
Always the fox.
Let's talk about his legacy. Because for a guy who hated writing, he left a massive mark. And he wasn't just a thinker. He was a doer in the academic world.
He was. He founded Wolfson College at Oxford in 1966. And Wolfson reflects his values. It was founded with a strong egalitarian and democratic ethos. It was designed to be different from the stuffy, hierarchical colleges of the past. It was for graduate students, more open, more modern.
He racked up the awards, too. The Order of Merit, which is a huge deal in Britain, the Jerusalem Prize for his defense of civil liberties.
And he remained active until the end. He died in 1997 at the age of 88. He's buried in Wolvercote Cemetery in Oxford, by the way.
The tributes that came in were just incredible. The world's greatest talker, the century's most inspired reader.
And I think the most fitting tribute is simply looking at the world through his eyes. When we see political rhetoric today, Berlin gives us the tools to decode it. He gives us this kind of intellectual toolkit.
So let's recap. What are the big takeaways from the life and thought of Isaiah Berlin?
First, I think, is the man himself. The Russian refugee who became a British knight but refused to let go of his complex identity. He showed us that being an outsider, having that foot in two worlds, can be a source of incredible intellectual strength.
Second, the fox and the hedgehog. A simple game, but with a profound warning. The danger of getting locked into one big idea versus the wisdom of seeing the world's complexity.
Third, and perhaps most importantly, the warning about positive liberty. The understanding that freedom is a slippery word, and when people promise to liberate your true self by forcing you to do something, you should be very, very afraid.
And finally, value pluralism. The acceptance that we can't have it all.
Right. We can't have perfect liberty and perfect equality. We have to make hard choices. And recognizing that necessity, that tragedy, is what keeps us from becoming fanatics. It's what allows for compromise and decency.
It's really relevant today, isn't it? We see so much polarization, people acting like their side has the only true, the one big answer.
Absolutely. Berlin teaches us that the person on the other side of the argument isn't necessarily evil or stupid. They might just be prioritizing a different, equally valid human value. The clash isn't between good and evil. It's often between good and good. And that is much harder to navigate.
That is a powerful thought. The clash is between good and good.
It changes how you listen to the news, doesn't it? It forces you to be a little more charitable, a little more foxy.
It really does.
Yeah.
So here is the final thought we want to leave you with. It's a question that comes directly out of Berlin's tragic, but I think ultimately realistic view of the world.
If values truly clash, and there is no single right answer, and every choice we make entails a loss, how do we make decisions without being paralyzed? Is the acknowledgement of that loss, that tragedy, actually the most adult form of politics we have? Or is it just too hard for us to accept that we can't build heaven on earth?
Something to mull over. Thanks for diving deep with us.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
Welcome to the debate. Today, we are stepping into the mind of a man who was, by many accounts, the greatest conversationalist of the 20th century, Sir Isaiah Berlin. He was a philosopher who didn't really write books in the traditional sense. He spoke them. He dictated his thoughts in these rapid-fire streams of consciousness that fundamentally shaped how the Western world came to understand the fragility of freedom during the Cold War.
And he is a man whose ghost is arguably sitting at the table of every major political argument we have today. I mean, we're looking at a figure who was, by his own admission, a Russian Jew from Riga embedded deep in the British establishment. And that tension between the outsider looking in and the insider looking out, it colored every single thing he ever said.
It certainly did. And the central question we're grappling with today is one that Berlin posed most famously in his 1958 lecture, Two Concepts of Liberty. We're asking, is his stark distinction between negative liberty, simply being left alone, and positive liberty, the power to take control of your destiny, is that the necessary firewall against tyranny? Or, as you might suggest, is his concept of value pluralism actually just a sophisticated recipe for political paralysis?
That is exactly where I stand. I'm here to represent the perspective that while Berlin was a brilliant historian of ideas, a charming intellect, his trauma-informed rejection of positive liberty is overly reductive. I believe his philosophy risks demonizing legitimate democratic aspirations, and frankly, it neuters our capacity for collective self-mastery.
And I naturally take the opposing view. I believe Berlin's defense of negative liberty and his recognition of value pluralism are not acts of resignation at all. They are essential tools for preserving human dignity. He provides the intellectual armor we need against the most dangerous idea of all, the belief that there is a single, final solution to human problems that justifies any means to achieve it.
Well, let's test that armor, because I think it has quite a few chinks in it. But before we start tearing it apart, we should probably establish what he actually meant, because negative and positive liberty can sound a bit like battery terminals to the uninitiated.
That's a fair point. To understand Berlin, you have to start with his core realization, which is that human values don't play nice. Liberty and equality, justice and mercy, these aren't puzzle pieces that fit together to make a perfect picture. They collide. And they are incommensurate, meaning there is no common currency to weigh them against each other. If you have total liberty for the wolves, You cannot have security for the sheep.
Right. You can't maximize everything at once.
Exactly. And because values collide, Berlin argues we need a baseline for a free society. And that baseline is negative liberty. Berlin defines this very specifically as the area within which a subject, a person or a group, is or should be left to do or be what he is able to do or be without interference by other persons.
Freedom from.
Yes, freedom from. Freedom from the policeman, freedom from the censor, freedom from the state telling you what to wear or what to read or how to worship. It is specifically the absence of coercion. It's the size of the bubble around you that the state cannot cross.
And this is where my issue begins. You used the word armor earlier. Berlin treats negative liberty as this sacred, safe harbor, but he contrasts it with positive liberty, which he views with deep, almost pathological suspicion. Positive liberty is the answer to the question, who is the master? It is the freedom to participate in government, the freedom to self-actualize, the freedom to take control of one's destiny.
And that sounds wonderful on paper. I mean, who doesn't want to be the master of their own destiny? But Berlin warns us to look at the receipt. In Two Concepts of Liberty, he traces how this freedom to gets twisted. It relies on a dangerous mental gymnastics, the concept of the split self.
The split self?
Yes. And this is crucial to his warning. To have self-mastery, you essentially have to divide the human being into two parts. You have the higher rational self, the part of you that wants to be moral, disciplined, thinks long-term, and so on. And then you have the lower irrational self, the part that wants to drink too much, be lazy, act on impulse. You get the idea.
Cher, I think most of us feel that conflict when the alarm goes off on a Monday morning.
We do. But the danger comes when you apply that internal struggle to politics. If you believe that a person is only truly free when their higher self is in charge, it becomes very easy for a state or a class or a dictator to say, look, you don't know what your rational self wants. You're being controlled by your lower impulses. Therefore, I will coerce you in the name of your real freedom.
The forcing you to be free argument, Rousseau's paradox.
Precisely. It allows the dictator to say, I am not oppressing you. I am liberating your true self from your ignorance. That is the logic of the Inquisition burning heretics to save their eternal souls. It is the logic of the Soviet Gulag re-educating dissidents to help them understand the truth of history. Berlin protects us from the terrifying notion that elites can dictate our real will better than we can.
I see the trap he's describing. And look, writing in 1958 with the shadow of Stalinism on one side and the memory of Nazism fresh on the other, I understand why he was terrified of the state claiming to know your inner will. But here is my problem. By treating positive liberty as this radioactive concept that inevitably leads to the Gulag, he creates a false dichotomy that preserves the status quo.
How does it preserve the status quo?
Because positive liberty isn't just about totalitarian social engineering. There is a robust tradition, specifically the French liberal tradition, where positive liberty is simply about capacity. It's about the emancipation of people through the state.
But through the state is exactly where the friction points lie.
This obsession with non-interference, you end up with a very hollow freedom for the vulnerable. If I am poor, uneducated, and sick, I possess negative liberty in the sense that no policeman is physically stopping me from buying a yacht or attending Oxford. The door is open, but I have no actual capacity to walk through it. I am not free in any meaningful sense.
Berlin actually addressed this. He famously said, liberty is not the only value. He acknowledged that sometimes you have to curtail liberty to provide social welfare or equality, but his point was that we shouldn't confuse terms. He said, everything is what it is. Liberty is liberty, not equality or fairness or justice.
He acknowledged it, but he sidelined it. He creates an intellectual environment where any attempt at collective action, any attempt to use the state to solve big problems like inequality, gets framed as the first step toward tyranny. It's a slippery slope fallacy. He assumes that if we try to have Athenian-style democracy where we collectively decide our future and shape our society, we are inevitably sliding toward Robespierre and the guillotine.
I don't think he sidelines it. I think he creates a hierarchy of safety. You mentioned Athenian-style democracy. Berlin didn't deny the value of participation.
He denied that participation was the same thing as liberty.
That feels like a semantic game to avoid the hard work of governance.
No, it's a crucial distinction. If you conflate liberty with democracy, you can justify the tyranny of the majority. If 51% of the people vote to ban a religion, that is democratic, but it is not liberty. Berlin is saying we must keep the definition of liberty pure, meaning non-interference, so that we can clearly see when it is being violated, even by a democracy. He wanted to make sure we couldn't hide the loss of freedom behind the mask of the people's will.
But by keeping it so pure, he strips it of its power to inspire. Berlin warns against the rationalist conflation, this idea that we can take rational control over human destiny. But without some attempt at rational control, we are just leaves blowing in the wind of market forces or history.
Berlin would say that is better than being leaves raked into a pile and burned for the sake of a tidy garden.
That is a vivid image, but it brings us directly to the source of that imagery. We can't pretend Berlin was operating in a vacuum. You mentioned he was writing in 1958, but his fear goes back much, much further. He is projecting a specific trauma onto the entire history of political thought.
You're referring to his childhood in Russia.
I am. We have to look at the biography. You cannot separate the man from the theory.
I agreed, but I think the biography strengthens his case rather than weakening it. He wasn't just theorizing in an ivory tower in Oxford. He saw the alternative.
Let's look at the facts, though. Born in Riga, moved to Petrograd, he witnessed the Russian revolutions firsthand as a child.
There is a specific memory he recounted later in life to his biographer, Michael Ignatieff, that I think explains his entire philosophy. He was about 7 years old, walking with his governess in Petrograd during the February Revolution, and he saw a man, a pharaon, a Tsarist police officer being dragged away by a mob.
The lynching bee, he called it.
Yes, a crowd of 20 or so dragging a man to a not very agreeable fate. The man was struggling, white-faced, kicking his legs. Berlin said this gave him a permanent horror of violence that remained with him for the rest of his life.
It's a horrific image. A 7-year-old watching a lynching would be scarred forever.
Exactly. He saw what happens when a society pursues a singular, violent vision of justice. That pharaon wasn't a combatant in that moment. He was a symbol of the old order being crushed by the new, rational will of the people. When Berlin tells us to beware of positive liberty, he isn't just talking about abstract philosophy. He's remembering that police officer being dragged through the snow.
That is a compelling narrative, and it gives his work tremendous emotional weight. But have you considered that this trauma might have distorted his vision rather than clarified it?
In what sense?
Berlin wasn't just an innocent bystander. He was born into a wealthy Jewish family. His father was the head of the Riga Association of Timber Merchants. To the Bolsheviks, his family wasn't just people. They were the bourgeoisie. They were the class enemy.
True. They were targets.
They felt increasingly oppressed. They faced anti-Semitism. They were exiles who fled to England to save their lives and their fortune. Even after he became Sir Isaiah Berlin, president of the British Academy, a man at the very heart of his establishment, he insisted, "I am a Russian Jew from Riga. In all my years in England, cannot change this."
He was honest about his identity. I don't see that as a flaw.
It's not a flaw, but think about what that does to your worldview. His philosophy is a defense mechanism. It is the philosophy of an exile who is terrified of systemic change because, in his experience, systemic change means the mob coming for his family's timber business.
That seems a bit reductive. You're saying his philosophy is just bourgeois anxiety dressed up as political theory?
I'm saying he developed an allergy to any radical change. So when he attacks positive liberty, he isn't just attacking a philosophical concept. He is attacking the very idea of revolution or radical social restructuring. His philosophy is not necessarily a universal truth about the human condition. It is the survival strategy of a displaced intellectual. He wants a world where no one can knock on his door at midnight.
I think that is a fair psychological profile, but I don't think it invalidates his insights. If anything, it gave him a unique vantage point. The British establishment he lived in was complacent. They took freedom for granted. Berlin knew how fragile it was. And this leads us to his concept of value pluralism, which I think stands on its own, regardless of his childhood fears.
Value pluralism. the idea that we can't have it all.
It's more than that. It's the idea that the good is not one thing. For centuries, Western philosophy, Plato, Hegel, Marx, was obsessed with monism. The idea that there is one perfect way to live, and if we just find the formula, all conflict will end. The idea that all good things are compatible.
And Berlin says that is a lie.
A dangerous lie. He argues that values are objective. They are real, but they are inherently incompatible. You cannot have total justice and total mercy. Justice demands consistency, mercy demands exception. You cannot have total spontaneity and total planning. As Berlin put it, these collisions of values are of the essence of what they are and what we are.
The tragedy of the human condition.
But it's a liberating tragedy. Because if you accept that conflict is inevitable, you stop trying to purify the world. You stop trying to make the omelet, because you realize the eggs are human lives. Monism tells you to break the eggs to get to the paradise. Pluralism tells you to compromise, to trade off, to muddle through.
But this is where the paralysis comes in. I want to cite the critique by the philosopher Alan Brown here. Berlin ignores the fact that values are commensurable to the extent that they contribute to the human good. By treating values as these distinct clashing atoms that can never be reconciled, Berlin removes the imperative to solve problems.
But human good is exactly the kind of vague, monistic term Berlin warned against. Whose definition of human good? Yours? Mine? The Pope's? Stalin's?
But without some unifying concept of the good, you end up with relativism. Berlin was fascinated by the counter-Enlightenment thinkers like Vico, Herder, and Hamann. He loved them because they attacked the Cartesian fallacy that everything could be mapped out logically. But by elevating these irrationalist thinkers, Berlin elevates the idea that moral conflicts are insoluble.
He elevates the idea that they are hard.
No, he makes them impossible. If you say, well, liberty clashes with justice, and that's just the tragedy of life, you are effectively washing your hands of the duty to find a way to reconcile them. It's a philosophy that lets you sit in an Oxford common room, sip sherry, and sigh about the tragedy of the human condition while the world burns outside. It is intellectually lazy. It says the world is a mess, and trying to fix it usually makes it worse, so let's just do nothing.
Lazy?
I think that is a deeply unfair characterization of a man who worked for the British diplomatic service in Washington during the war, writing dispatches that Churchill himself read avidly. He wasn't indifferent, he was cautious.
Cautious to the point of immobility.
No, cautious because he understood the complexity of the world. And this caution is perfectly captured in his famous categorization of thinkers, the hedgehog and the fox.
Ah, yes. The parlor game that got out of hand?
Berlin always said he never meant it very seriously, calling it an enjoyable intellectual game, but it stuck because it captures something vital. He drew the line from the Greek poet Archilochus. The fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing.
So just to clarify for the listeners, the hedgehog relates everything to a single central vision like Plato, Dante, or Marx. Everything fits into the system. If you are a hedgehog, you have a hammer and everything looks like a nail.
Correct. And the fox pursues many ends, often unrelated and even contradictory, like Aristotle or Shakespeare. They seize upon the variety of the world without trying to force it into a box. They see the world in all its messy detail.
And, let me guess, Berlin is the fox?
Berlin is the ultimate fox. He knew many things. He saw that the world cannot be boiled down to a single slogan.
See, I come at it from a different angle. I think he used the fox label as a shield.
A shield.
Yes, it was a way to escape commitment. By claiming to be a fox, by claiming that the world is just a jumble of complex, contradictory experiences, he avoided the hard work of being a hedgehog. He avoided the responsibility of building a unifying system that could actually guide society. It's easier to be a fox. You can just critique everyone else's systems. Oh, that's too simplistic. Oh, that leads to tyranny, without ever having to defend a positive vision of your own.
That is a compelling argument, but I think you're mistaking his method for his motivation. Have you considered how he worked?
You mean the dictation?
Exactly. Berlin didn't sit down and construct rigid treatises like a bricklayer building a wall.
He dictated. He spoke into a tape recorder, often while talking to friends. His secretaries, poor souls, had to transcribe tapes where he was laughing, joking, and the machine was rattling on the table.
Mental spaghetti, I believe it was called.
His writing style mimicked his speech, animated, quick, and constantly jumping from one idea to another. This wasn't avoidance. It was a reflection of his belief that reality is messy. To write like a hedgehog, to force everything into a strict Chapter 1, Chapter 2 structure, would have been to lie about the nature of the world. He refused to simplify the world artificially just to make it fit into a book.
Or perhaps he simply lacked the discipline to synthesize his thoughts into a coherent whole. We must remember, he didn't enjoy writing. He relied on Henry Hardy to edit and compile almost all of his work from 1974 onwards. A philosopher who doesn't write is a bit like a chef who doesn't cook. It suggests a certain lack of follow-through.
He cooked with words, just not always on paper. But let's look at where this leaves us today, because we aren't in 1958 anymore.
Indeed. The Soviet Union is gone, but the debate between the rights of the individual and the power of the collective is louder than ever.
I believe Berlin's legacy is a necessary warning. We live in a world that is polarizing again. On the left and the right, we see people who believe they possess the absolute truth and the moral authority to enforce it. They are hedgehogs with sharp quills. They believe if they can just capture the state, they can force the world to be rational.
And you think we need more foxes?
I do. By prioritizing negative liberty, Berlin sets a boundary that power cannot cross. By accepting value pluralism, he teaches us to tolerate imperfection. He tells us that liberty may clash with social justice and that there is no final resolution, only trade-offs. It is a humble philosophy. It keeps us safe from the tyranny of good intentions.
His philosophy offers little for those seeking to build a better society today. Negative liberty is safe, yes. It is the liberty of the private room. But it is insufficient.
Insufficient for what?
Insufficient for the dignity of human beings he claimed to cherish. If we want to solve the massive collective problems of our time, inequality, pandemics, global justice, we need a bit of positive liberty. We need the courage to define a common good, even if that risks the collisions Berlin feared. We cannot live entirely in the tragedy. Sometimes we must act. We cannot just be foxes running around the edges of the forest. Sometimes we need to build a house.
A powerful closing thought. It seems we are back to the collision of values ourselves. The need for safety versus the need for action. The fear of the gulag versus the hope of the agora.
It is fascinating to reflect on the man himself, isn't it? A man who insisted he was a Russian Jew from Riga until the very end, yet became the quintessential Oxford Don. A man who was an outsider, who defined the inside.
A man who didn't like writing, who used dictation tapes, and who was described as the world's greatest talker.
And perhaps that is the ultimate lesson of Isaiah Berlin. He didn't leave us a rigid system. He didn't leave us a Bible of Berlinism. He left us a conversation.
A conversation that reminds us that the best ideas and the truth itself often emerge from the rigorous, respectful challenge of opposing viewpoints, just like this one.
Whether you are a hedgehog or a fox.
Precisely. Thank you for listening to the debate.